Hey there, extraordinary treasurers. If you want to be a jewel superstar and a super treasurer, here's the first of 4 jewel cornerstones that can get you there. The first of the 4 cornerstones is sequence, doing things in the correct order. I mentioned that the jewel version we use here in Georgia-Cumberland only gives treasurers access to 1 month at a time. You can't put the finishing touches on December while you're adding deposits in January and writing checks with a February date. So how do you know what month it is in Jewel? You look in the bottom left corner of your Jewel homepage to find out your current Jewel month. No, not the bottom right, the bottom left. Nearly every time I ask somebody when I'm helping them what month, and I say the bottom left, they look to the bottom right. So make sure you're looking at the bottom left or you will get confused. If your Jewel homepage says January of 2021, then January of 2021 has not been finished and closed yet. And Jewel is a bulldog about finishing and closing a month before letting you move ahead. So no matter if it's actually March or April of 2021, every offering you enter, every check you write, no matter what date you try to enter in Jewel, will be posted as January of 2021. Do any of you like to bake? Is there a sequence to making a cake? What happens when you ignore the right sequence? Let's say you measure the flour and the sugar and you put them in the oven. The recipe says 350 for 35 minutes. Then, after the time in the oven is up, you throw in the eggs and the oil and the milk. And let's just throw the frosting in there too and mix it all up and serve it. What kind of cake is it going to be? It's exactly the same ingredients. What's the difference? The difference is sequence. What about building a house? Does sequence have anything to do with that? We're remodeling our house. Here are the before and after photos of the kitchen. One of the biggest challenges is making sure we had the right sequence. You got to put the wiring in before you hang the drywall. You need to measure carefully for the cabinets so that you know that the ones you've ordered are going to fit. There are so many things that can go wrong if sequence is ignored. Jewel has a sequence too. You can't ignore it, but your results will suffer. I'm spending a bit more time on this section because it is so important. One of the best things you can do to follow the sequence in Jewel is to keep up. In the month of January, do January. Once January ends, tie it up and close January and move into February. Running behind in Jewel sets up a whole cascade of problems, and I want to help you avoid that. Let's talk about sequence. This may seem really complicated and overwhelming, but remember learning to drive? So many things to remember all at once, especially if you learned in a car that had a clutch. But now you get into your car and arrive at work and you really don't even think about what it took to get there. I want to start with Jewel's Next Step button. It is right here on home page and it keeps you oriented as to where you are in the sequence of the month. Learn where that next step button is, because if you call for assistance, I will often ask you, what does your next step button say? Because I can tell a lot from the answer to that question. In this case, the next step button says, Start New Offering. All throughout the month, treasurers have 2 main tasks. Enter offering deposits using Start New Offering, and paying bills using Write Checks to enter them into Jewel. You will do that over and over again throughout the month. And throughout that month, your next step button will continue to say, Start New Offering. And it should, until all the offerings for that month have been entered. Jewel is programmed to ask you if you have entered the last offering for the month. And when you say yes, Jewel will move ahead to remit to conference. But before you say yes, you need to know that all of your offerings for the month have been entered, like checking to make sure that all the kids are in the car before you leave on vacation. Even if you think they are, you take one last head count. If your church uses Adventist giving, your last offering for the month will always be the last Adventist giving deposit for that month. So keep that in mind when Jewel asks you that question. But wait, before we remit to conference, there's one more thing we need to check. Are all the bills paid and all the checks entered into Jewel? That needs to be done before we take the next step in the sequence. Some churches print their checks directly from Jewel. Others have a paper checkbook, and they then enter the checks into Jewel afterwards. Either way, make sure you have all your checks entered into Jewel before you remit to conference. Once you've entered all the offerings and you say yes, closing the month begins. Jewel automatically creates a remittance check based on all the offerings you've entered all month. The remittance check is made up of the tithe and conference and world offerings that your donors have given. All you have to do is click OK. And once you click OK, the next question Jewel asks is, do you want to send your remittance report? And you say yes. A question about budget allocations comes up next, which you will answer based on how your church is set up. Now this is really important. If at any point in this progression, if Jewel says, are you ready to, and you're not sure if you're ready, say no. Nothing bad will happen if you say no. And it will give you time to make sure that you're ready to take that next step. That step will be saved on the next step button and will be there ready for you when you're ready to start back up. Next, it's time to reconcile. Reconciling is a way of making sure that your Jewel checks and deposits are correct, that they match the bank. There's an entire section of videos on reconciling. So I will just say that reconciling before closing the month may not be possible for everyone, but it is possible for most. And if you can, it will result in the most accurate monthly reports. After you reconcile, the next step button changes to Print Monthly Reports. This is where Jewel prints out all the reports that should go to the board. And Jewel warns you that this is a point of no return. So make sure you're ready to close the month. Here's where you could say no if you needed to look at your checklist to make sure that you're ready. Then you can go back and click on Print Monthly Reports, which will still be the next step. After you print, the next step will say Backup Data, and you use your USB thumb drive to make a copy in case your computer crashes and you need it. But one backup is not enough, and the last step of the month says Send Backup to Conference. This sends a complete copy of your entire database to the Jewel server, giving you the security of knowing that even if a flood or fire or tornado came along, you'd not lose those offerings that you worked so hard to enter. That closes a month, and Jewel now moves to the next calendar month, and the next step button will say Start New Offering. So what happens if you don't go in sequence? What if you don't enter all your deposits? Well, then your remittance check is going to be written for the wrong amount. What if you skip reconciliation for several months? Your reports will almost certainly be filled with errors, and your numbers will not be accurate because you didn't fix the mistakes that were there. Anytime you skip over one step because you're late for the next one, ignoring sequence, there's going to be trouble down the line. Just 9 steps. Enter offerings, pay bills and enter checks, remit to conference, send remittance report, budget allocations, reconcile, print month-end reports, backup data, send backup to conference. At the beginning, yes, it's going to seem overwhelming, but I promise it will get easier, just like driving did. Accuracy is the second cornerstone, and that's where we're going next. See you there.